You've probably wondered what's actually going on inside the mind of an AI like ChatGPT or Gemini, right? I mean, we see them writing poetry, solving tricky math problems, explaining really complex stuff. It looks for all the world like it's thinking, but is it? Let's dig into this, because what researchers are now finding might just flip how you think about AI completely on its head.
Get a load of this. This is a real, actual response from the AI model Gemini. It says 1776 is a leap year. Correct. And then, in the very next sentence, concludes the total opposite. The sentence structure is perfect, the logic seems to flow, and yet the conclusion is just completely wrong. It's baffling, isn't it?
And that right there, that's the central mystery we're going to unravel today. How can these incredibly powerful models pull off these amazing feats of brilliance, but then turn around and make such basic, self-contradictory mistakes? Well, the answer, it turns out, lies in some really fascinating new research that put AI reasoning under a microscope.
Okay, so first, let's really get our heads around the problem itself. Because that weird quote from Gemini, that's not just a random bug. Nope, it's a symptom of something way, way deeper. You see, researchers are realizing that these large language models are absolute masters at creating what they call fluent nonsense. They can spit out text that follows the form of logical, step-by-step thinking, making it seem super convincing. But here's the thing. This isn't just a simple mistake. It's a massive clue. It's telling us that whatever the AI is doing, it's not the same thing that you and I do when we reason.
So if it's not actually reasoning, then what on earth is it doing? Well, this is where it gets interesting. Researchers have come up with a theory that might just explain everything.
First, you got to understand the technique that creates this whole illusion. It's called chain of thought prompting. It's as simple as telling the AI, let's think step by step. And boom, it starts laying out its thought process. This trick was a huge leap forward in getting better answers from AI. But, as we're about to find out, it's also the very thing that creates this incredibly persuasive magic trick.
And that brings us to the core of the theory, what the researchers call the data distribution lens. The big idea here is that the AI isn't thinking at all, not in the way we do. Instead, it's a hyper-advanced, incredibly sophisticated pattern-matching machine. It's swallowed a giant chunk of the internet, and its success comes from just recognizing and stitching together the statistical patterns it's seen before. Here's a good way to think about it. Imagine two students. The first student actually understands the principles of math. You can give her any problem, even one she's never seen, and she can figure it out. The second student just memorized the answer key for the textbook. He'll get 100% on the test if the questions are identical, but you change just one number and he's completely toast. This research suggests that our AIs today are a lot like that second student. Their reasoning is brittle. It shatters the second they step outside the familiar patterns of their training data.
Now, to prove a theory like this, you can't just throw a few questions at ChatGPT. No, you need to be way more rigorous. You have to build a controlled experiment, a kind of lab for testing AIs.
To really put this to the test, they couldn't use an existing model. Why? Because it's already been contaminated, so to speak, with all that messy data from the web. They needed a clean room, a totally fresh environment to see what an AI could really do from scratch. And they called their experiment Data Alchemy.
And the whole setup was brilliantly simple. First, they created a tiny little world with just letters and words. Then they defined a few very clear, simple rules, like shift every letter forward by 13 spots. Next, they trained a brand new, baby AI on only examples of these rules. And then came the moment of truth. They started testing it out of distribution, which is a fancy way of saying they gave it problems that were just a little bit different from what it had been trained on.
And this is where that beautiful illusion of AI reasoning just completely falls apart. The results were, frankly, staggering. So check this out. They gave it a new type of task. It was just a combination of rules the AI already knew, but it had never seen them put together in this specific way. The result? Total collapse. On the tasks it recognized, 100% accuracy. On this new combination, 0%. It just could not make that logical leap.
Okay, what about something even simpler then? The AI was trained on transforming words that were 4 letters long, so the researchers gave it a 5-letter word. Just one single extra letter. And you guessed it, performance went from 100% accuracy right off a cliff to 0. It didn't understand the rule. It had just memorized the pattern for 4-letter words.
This last test is almost hard to believe. They kept the problem exactly the same, but they made tiny, totally meaningless changes to the prompt. We're talking adding an extra space or a random symbol, and even these tiny, superficial tweaks were enough to totally throw the model off and send its accuracy plummeting.
So the verdict is pretty clear, right? The evidence is overwhelming. The researchers' conclusion is that what we've been calling chain-of-thought reasoning is really just a brittle mirage. It's an incredibly sophisticated illusion, but it's built on a foundation of pattern matching, not genuine, flexible, human-like thinking.
Okay, so what does all this sciencey stuff actually mean for you? Why should you care when you're using AI for work or school or your business? Let's get practical.
I think the single biggest takeaway is this. We have to shift how we think about these systems. They're not coworkers. They are not independent thinkers. They are extremely powerful tools. And like any powerful tool, you have to know its strengths, but you also have to be acutely aware of its weaknesses.
So, for your personal use, this means an AI is awesome for brainstorming or getting a first draft of an email, but you absolutely should not trust it to fact-check an important paper or, give you legal advice. For businesses, this is a game changer for automating repetitive tasks that always follow the same pattern, but relying on it for a high-stakes financial forecast without a human expert checking every single number, that's a recipe for disaster. For both, you've got to watch out for that fluent nonsense, the stuff that sounds perfectly plausible but is just dead wrong.
So let's just quickly recap the big takeaways here. First, this chain of thought reasoning we see is really just pattern matching on steroids. Second, an AI is only as good as the data it was trained on, period. That means you have to stay skeptical and be critical of its answers, especially when the stakes are high. And finally, for any serious business application, testing the AI on stuff it hasn't seen before isn't just a good idea, it's absolutely essential.
Look, none of this means AI isn't useful. It is an absolutely incredible technology. But this research forces us to ask a much bigger, much deeper question. If our current approach of just making models bigger and feeding them more data only creates a more convincing mirage, then what's next? What's it actually going to take to build an AI that doesn't just mimic thinking, but truly understands?